Okay, so sorry for the delay, and welcome to the folks that are here with us. And I just want to give you a little bit of background information and talk to you about how the webinar is going to work. And then if you have questions, you can just let me know. Looks like I'm breaking up here again, so I'm going to move to another location. Hopefully that'll work better for us. Okay. Try to get to where I actually have Wi-Fi here.
You just want them to put their questions in the chat, yes? Or Q&A?
Yeah, so people can put their questions in the chat, and sorry about that. You can put your questions in the chat, and at the end of the session, we'll also have a Q&A. So you should be able to find the Q&A option. You can add your questions at any time, and we will go through the questions one by one at the end of the session.
Sounds good.
All right. Can you still hear me? Because my video is going in and out here.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Well, let me start with the introductions then, and then we can, I'll give you guys the opportunity to present. So my name is Dan Ascher. I'm the owner of A+ Test Prep and Tutoring in Philadelphia area, and we have Laura and Liz here with us, who both are in the college admissions consulting business. And I have a bunch of notes with their background information, so I'm going to go get it. I'll be right back. Sorry about that.
We can just introduce ourselves if you'd like.
Introduce ourselves, Dan. Okay. Well, that sounds good. So, hi, Heather. Hi, Shayla. I know you. That's so funny.
So let me introduce these guys, and then we will get started with the presentation. And again, if you have any questions or comments, please put them into the chat. So Liz Price and Laura Brennan are the founders of College Composed, a bi-coastal college counseling practice with Liz in the Bay Area and Laura in Philadelphia. Every year they help students from all over the country apply to the UCs and many other colleges. Before becoming college counselors, they've spent most of their careers working with teens, including their own. Liz earned her BA in Mathematical Economics from Pomona College, her MSW from UCLA, and her College Counseling Certificate with Distinction from UCLA. Before counseling college-bound students, Liz's work centered on adolescents and young adults. She worked in residence life at Caltech, served as an assistant director of University of Pennsylvania's Program for Student Community Involvement, and co-founded a teen center in Southern California. In addition to working with College Composed clients, Liz has been very involved in Mountain View High School's AVID program. You'll have to tell us what AVID is, where she created the curriculum for first-generation college-bound students, many of whom applied to the UCs. Laura earned her BA in Economics and English from Georgetown University and her MA in Literature from American University. She recently completed her coursework for the College Counseling Certificate with Distinction through UCLA. Like Liz, she has also volunteered in the AVID program. Before partnering with Liz to create College Composed, Laura ran a private college essay business and taught English at a private all-girls high school in Delaware, where she worked one-to-one with students on their college essays. She also taught college-level writing as an adjunct instructor and worked as a freelance writer. She and Liz have read hundreds of UC personal insight questions over the past several years. So welcome to you both. Let me know if there's anything you want to add, and then I'll bring up your presentation.
No, I can explain AVID if you want briefly. It was kind of in there, but it stands for Advancement via Individual Determination, and it's a program specific to first-generation students that it's a 4-year program that takes them kind of from freshman through senior year of high school and supports them in their college-bound journey. So it's a program. It's an international program, but it's pretty big out here in California.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let me bring up your presentation.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
So we're we're anxious to answer any of your guys' questions, but we're gonna just start with we always say brief, but it always goes on a little longer than we intend. With a presentation about the UCs themselves, and just kind of providing you information about the entire application, and then really focusing on the personal insight questions, which are a big part of the application. So you might know already, but we're just going to give you a brief overview that there are 9 campuses, and you'll see they're spread throughout the state. And I think what's a little bit different, like that they're very different. So they're not like, it's not like one's the flagship and these are all, I mean, Berkeley is considered kind of the flagship of the group, but it's not really like that in the same way that it can be in other states where there's one major university and then there's all these satellite universities. This is really a system with 9 campuses that are individual and have all of their own merits and their own rights. And there's only one application to apply to all of them. So you have to pay per campus that you apply to, but the same application goes to all of the students. I mean, goes to all of the schools.
Goes to all the schools.
And yeah, and sometimes people get confused because there is a UCSF San Francisco, but that is for graduate students only. That's a mostly medical professional school. So that does not have any undergraduate programs. But you see that they extend all the way from Davis down through San Diego in the South. And it's really important to note that they are, so it's the same application, but that's really where the similarities end, that they, even physically, they look very different. So we just wanted to show you quickly, like, this is what Santa Cruz looks like. Like it's like you're in the middle of a forest. You're in what's called the slow coast of California. It's this area between San Francisco and, well, Santa Cruz is kind of the end of the slow coast, but it's a really laid back place with this sort of a vibe. And it really looks like you're in a camp.
You really feel like you're at summer camp, and it's got, you're there in the forest, but the beach is very close. And if you go there, I mean, you are just walking and walking and walking up and down
hills,
and forest trails.
Yeah, it's very hilly. And then this is Santa Barbara, which is got to be one of the most beautiful locations if you like the beach. And it's because it's literally right on the beach. The school's just right there. And that's really just north of LA. So that's in a very sunny part of the state. And then this is UCLA. You can see that this is super urban. You're in Restwood. It's a very confined, beautiful campus. It's actually the smallest campus of the UC complex, but the largest in terms of number of students and just how close it is to downtown LA. So they're very different. And so it's just like, just like you wouldn't apply to all the Ivies necessarily because they all have their different personalities. The same would be said for the UCs. They're different schools. But they all have similar process because it is that one application. And so they follow these 13 points of comprehensive review where they are looking at, this used to be 14 points of comprehensive review until this year, but now it's 13 because they're not doing test scores anymore. So
they are completely, let me just interrupt for 1 second. They're completely test blind, meaning that even if you tried to send test scores, they would not be looked at.
Right. And the schools, they do evaluate you, slightly differently, meaning that they're all looking at the same thing. They're all doing sort of holistic review, but each individual campus values different things differently. So, for example, UC Santa Barbara gives equal weight to your academic performance and your kind of extracurricular activities. So they're very clear about that being kind of a 50-50 mix for them, whereas Berkeley is going to look more stronger at your academics, and they're going to even recalculate your GPA slightly differently at Berkeley than they do at the other schools. So they're looking for different things. But the standard, just so you know, the standard grade point average at the UCs, this is different from a lot of schools. They're only looking at your GPA from 10th and 11th grade. They're only calculating it based on those 2 years, which doesn't mean that you don't have to, what you took in 9th and 12th grade is still important because they're looking at your rigor and they're looking at how you've challenged yourself and all those sorts of things. But in terms of how they calculate your grade point average, it's pretty different. There is a minimum GPA to even be able to apply to the UCs, and for out-of-state students, it's a 3.4 on the UC calculated GPA. And they're looking at that. This is number 2 is the A through G requirements, and that's something that's pretty specific to California as well. I don't think any of these students are from California, so you'll all be applying out of state, is my understanding. So the A through G requirements are essentially just, I mean, you can look these up online, but they're, you know, just kind of telling you what you have to have in terms of numbers of years of history is A, B is English, C is math, D is science, E is foreign language, F is visual and performing arts, and G is college prep electives. So that they're looking at those things, but then they're also looking at, I think it even says outside of the, I think down at the one of the bottom ones is they're looking for classes kind of beyond the minimum requirements. Oh, actually, number 2 says that performance in a number of courses beyond the minimum A through G requirements. So you can look and see how each campus is evaluating you, like how they're weighing these, like what they consider to be important. You can just Google that, and they're usually, it's pretty transparent. Like they have, there's a website that you can go to and look that up.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to say about those, Laura, before I?
No, I think you covered those.
Okay. Yeah, so the website you would look at is just how are applications reviewed at the UCs. You can just Google that. It's there. So what's interesting to note is what is not part of the review.
Right. And I kind of jumped the gun in the last slide with telling you that that the UCs will not look at the ACT or the SAT until at least 2025. They might be coming up with their own test, but we don't know that yet. But for right now, you just know that you are not going to be submitting test scores. Teacher letter of recommendations, they won't read them. Every once in a while, you get invited to send a letter if you're part of a secondary review process, but teacher recs are just not part of their review.
Are they required? They're not required.
No,
they're not even allowed. They're not allowed.
They're not allowed.
They're not allowed. I see.
Yeah.
So sometimes Berkeley will ask people, as like Laura was saying, that secondary review process. Sometimes they invite certain students and they make it optional. If you get that option, I would take it. But they sometimes ask for a letter. But it's odd, and you shouldn't. It's not odd, but it's rare, I should say.
It's rare, and they are whipping through. I mean, we've gone to a lot of different sessions with admissions people from the UCs, and they are going through these applications very quickly because they receive such volume and they know exactly what they're looking for. So it wouldn't help you to send in an extra letter in any way.
Well, they're actually being read by outside readers, just to make that point clear. Like they hire outside readers who are scoring these on a point system. So it's not even like the Office of Admission has the time to read all of these anyway.
I see. Okay, so they have kind of an army of people that are like actually not part of their staff that do this.
Right.
They're trained readers.
Sure. They're trained readers.
Right. They're trained readers, yeah. And so with official transcripts, you are actually self-reporting your grades, but the best thing to do is have your transcript right in front of you when you're self-reporting your grades. It really is an exact science. You want exactly what you put on the UC application for the self-reporting your grades to look like what's on your transcript.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How do they weigh those honors and AP classes in that combination?
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. That was part
Yeah.
of the 13 points of comprehensive review. So when they're calculating your GPA, they look at your grades from 10th and 11th, like I said, your 10th and 11th grade grades, and you get up to 8 honors points, extra points that you can add into that GPA. So, but it's by semester. So you take AP physics, for example, and you got an A in that, you would get, instead of 4 points on that scale, you would get 5 points on their scale. So they give you an extra point for those, but that would be using 2 of your 8 because it's by semester, not by year. So you only get, because each of those grades is counted separately, you get 8 separate grades counted. Now, what's interesting is that in California, you get credit for honors level classes. Applying from out of state, they only give the additional points for AP classes or IB, but they don't do none of what the schools calls honors classes. You don't get extra credit for those at the UCs if you're out of state.
Okay. And the IB is also considered like an AP level class?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the last thing on this list is the school profile counselor letter. You know, when you're applying to college, when you're applying through the Common App and stuff, your schools, I don't know if you guys know this, your schools are sending a school profile, and you can Google your school profile that basically gives information about the number of classes offered, the number of AP classes offered or IB, or kind of all of that sort of stuff that gives kind of the context for your school. And that is not something that the UCs collect either. However, there is an opportunity Berkeley has just put out specifically that your counselor can add a school profile to them. So if you are applying to Berkeley, you should look into, we just got an email about this, you should consider asking your school counselor to submit it to Berkeley. And we can provide you with that link for that, because that's something that would be beneficial to you, for them to have some context of your school.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And the other thing that you want to know is that each UC will evaluate majors differently. And sometimes it varies by where the major is housed. And that means sort of sometimes you'll have, say, computer science in arts and sciences, and sometimes you'll have it in engineering. You also want to know that some majors are more difficult to get into than others. Computer science, again, comes to mind, engineering, biology. But what you don't want to do is try to get into a major that you think is easier and switch once you're there, because that can be very, very difficult. So you definitely would not want to count on that. I think when you're doing the applications, you will be checking off like which schools in which major. And at UCSD, you're actually also going to be asked to rank the colleges, which are just different living. Well, each college is kind of a living. Liz, how would you say this?
It's a residential college system at UCSD, so it's a little bit different in the sense that they have 7 different colleges and they all have different themes. So like one's the John Muir's house, and it's focused more on environmentalism. One is the Eleanor Roosevelt, that's really focused on internationalism. There's some that are more STEM related. So you're going to rank which of those colleges that you would like to live in and be a part of. And you're affiliated with that college for your 4 years. And the interesting thing about it is that you should definitely spend some time, if you're applying to San Diego, you should definitely understand that house system, because the general education requirements for each college differ. So it's not just a like, oh, I think that sounds like fun, or I really like the location of this college, or this college is slightly closer to the beach, or whatever, or they have better food. It's not, those are all things that you can look up online as well, but you should understand how they differ in terms of general education requirements, because some of them are much more, like if you're not a science person, you're not going to want to end up in the ones that are super sciencey, because they have more science requirements to graduate.
Right.
So you're going to just want to pay attention to that.
The other thing you want to think about, like for different UCs, is if you're interested in double majoring or minoring in a particular area, think you might switch majors, really dig into what you can do at certain schools. So, for example, at UC Santa Barbara, you can major in comp sci and you can major in econ, but you can't minor in either of these. The other thing that you're going to want to look at, again, with difficulty of major is what are capped majors? You know, capped majors are the ones that that basically have a cap on the number of people. More people want those majors than the school has room to accommodate. So again, you don't want to apply into a non-capped major thinking you're going to switch, because that's going to be really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of like, if we're just talking about the application itself, just so you guys understand, so you're going to be in this one application, you're going to check off which schools you want to go to or which schools you want to apply to. And then you're going to be asked to list majors, and they'll give you like a first choice major and an alternate major. And so you should just, again, you can Google this and you can look this up, but to understand that some of the campus evaluating some of them are looking at you for your first major and then looking at you for your second major, and some of them aren't. Some of them are just considering you for your first major. So it's just it's really interesting to kind of have that information to understand what's happening and like how your application is going to be reviewed. So for example, UCLA, they do ask for a second major. They give you a space to put that in there, but they are not considering it. You're not being considered for your second major.
And Berkeley wouldn't even consider a second major, but Irvine would, and Davis might in some situations. So you really want to dig in.
And to dig deep,
variability between the colleges.
There's a lot of variability, and it's just important to understand, like for example, at Berkeley, the College of Chemistry, Engineering, and Environmental Design, they all admit by major, but the College of Letters and Science and Natural Resources do not. They're just letting you into the college in general, and you'll declare your major once you're there. So, I mean, that's important information to understand at the UCs, and any school you're applying to is kind of what is the process for getting your major, and is it possible to get your major?
Nice.
So those are kind of, because the UCs are not providing, or you're not gathering all this other information from anybody else. The only thing that they're evaluating essentially is what you tell them. So you're providing all of this information, and the activities list is quite generous in terms of the number of spots and the number of characters they allow you, especially compared to the Common App. So as you guys probably know, even though it's not quite open yet, but the Common App will give you 10 spots and you'll get 150 characters to describe your activities. The UCs, they give you 20 spots in 6 different categories, and they give you a lot more space. They give you 350 characters in general, and sometimes some additional space to talk about. You know, for example, if you write down work experience, it gives you 250 characters to describe the job, the company that you work for, and then 350 characters to describe your what you do there, what your responsibilities are. So you just have to remember that everything the UCs are reviewing are things that you're telling them. And so you should definitely take advantage of this opportunity to tell them everything that you want to say.
Absolutely. And you also don't need to feel like you need to use all the spots and have something in every category. They're really what they want. And again, like when Liz and I go to admissions seminars, what comes across very strongly is they are not worried necessarily of, did that go in volunteering and that go in extracurricular? They just want the full picture of you. So, do what makes sense for you. Be consistent in your language. If you're going to write it from a narrative perspective, like I did this, then all of those entries should be I's. But if you're going to write it more like a resume, then keep that consistent. So that this is the other really important thing to know. You can't move your activities around once you enter them. So, I mean, with our students, we use a big spreadsheet to help outside the application so that they can get everything right in the spreadsheet and then cut and paste. You can do it in a Google Doc, but you just want to make sure to work outside the application. The other thing that you want to know is the readers are going to look at this activities list as your resume. In the same way that when you're applying for a job, the person gets your resume and then kind of they know what to expect. They know what to ask you in an interview. And that's where we get to the personal insight questions, which are basically like your written interview. I think I might have, yeah. Go ahead, Liz. I'm always jumping ahead. I'm always like, we got to go.
No, that's exactly it. It's like all that information we just talked about. This is kind of the order that it's going to come in the application. It's the order that they're going to read it in the application. And so this is just like in the Common App, really, when you're writing that personal statement, they're looking for it to be an additional piece of information about you, something that's speaking about your values, telling them who you are, something that's not found other places in your application, that's not in your letters of rec, that's not in your activities list, that sort of thing. The UCs are kind of the opposite. They are wanting the personal insight questions, like Laura said, to be the kind of the deeper dive into what's in your activities and what you've already kind of told them about you. So it's kind of like they want to say like, oh, I hope that I'm going to hear more about this in one of these questions. So if you think about it like you're the job applicant, so this stage of it, the personal insight questions are definitely the interview. And they don't have time. They do not interview anyone. So they consider the interview. So the purposes of these is they want to know that your potential for academic success and your goals for using the UC education when you're done, and how you're going to be a member of their campus community. So I think these are kind of what they're looking for when they're reading through your personal insight questions. Is this a student who's going to take full advantage of what the UCs have to offer? Remembering that they are a large research institution. And are they going to make us better while they're here and when they graduate? So that's what they're looking for you to tell them. So if we look back at those 13 points of comprehensive review, you can see that the ones that I've highlighted, those are all things that the only way that they have to get at that information is through what you're telling them in the application. Some of that will be into your activities list, and some of that's going to be what you tell them here in your PIQ responses.
Right. Well, and what's so nice is just you have so much room in your activities list that sometimes you get to say enough in your activities list that you really don't need to write about, say, a sport for your PIQ. You're only going to use your PIQs for something that you really need to expand on from the activities list. Okay.
If we just break down the words, because it's important what they call them. Like they don't call them essays, they call them personal insight questions. And the first word is personal, meaning that they should be about you. It says, regardless of the topic or structure, so whatever you're writing about, if you're writing about sports, if you're writing about, an academic opportunity, any of those sorts of things, regardless of what the topic is, each of your answers has the same subject, and that's you. So you always want to be talking about you and how you've grown as a result of whatever it is that you're presenting and talking about. And this is a quote directly from the UCs. The focus of every response should always be on the student, whether the impact of an experience on the student or their impact on others.
And that's actually good advice for any essays you're writing. You are really, the subject is always you. If you have to write about why you want to study business, you keep focus on your activities and what you've done so far, and not necessarily about what you telling them about, like what you want to know or something like that.
Right. It's not a research paper. These are definitely insightful. And we'll get to what that word means. Insight is having or showing an accurate and deep understanding. It's your perspective. So it's really for you to not just say what you've done and not just kind of do it as a resume entry, but to find the meaning behind it. So it's not just the what, but the so what. And that's a question that can really help you as you're writing these essays, to keep asking yourself, like, why does this matter? What did I learn? Like, to always be thinking about what you did as one part of it, what you learned as another part, and why that matters. And then the third question, or the third word, is questions.
It's questions.
And you go ahead, Laura.
Go ahead. Yeah, I will. So sorry, I'm just flipping back to. So on the one hand, you've got poetry, and the other end, you've got information. And the UCs are mainly interested in information. The Common App and some other narrative essays that you'll be writing, you can be a little bit more creative. You can be a little bit more poetic. But the UCs are very much about the facts and why you did what you did. So do they have to be well written? They do. Do they have to be interesting? Absolutely. But you only have 350 words per personal insight question, so you've got to get down to it.
Right. Yeah. And they really, we'll talk about this at the end, but they definitely don't want they don't want the flowery writing. They want to know, they want you to think about it like, if someone asked me this question in an interview, how would I respond in my own words?
Right. You don't need to tell a story. I mean, I think you don't need an anecdote. And that's not true for other types of essays.
You do need specific examples, though.
Yes.
So we want you to be specific. We want you to kind of to be fully you, but not, but you don't need the entry.
You don't need that you were sitting on a beach and it suddenly occurred to you that.
Right.
You don't need to take us back to the first day of high school.
Right.
So, okay.
So there are 8 questions, and you will only be writing 4 of them. So in general, we're going to go through each one of them now and kind of give you some insight into what they might be looking for, and what has worked with students that we've, approaches that students have taken, topics that they've used. But they are briefly: leadership, creativity, greatest skill, educational opportunity, greatest challenge, favorite subject, community service, and what makes you you. And really that number 8 is really what makes it, the question is really what makes you a good candidate for the UCs.
Right.
So looking at these 4 things together, so you're going to never just start writing one. Just say like, oh, I'm going to write this about leadership and get started. You don't want to do that. You really want to consider first, what 4 are you going to answer? And how are those 4 together going to tell your complete story? So you definitely want to have thought through them as a unit before you start writing any one of them. And what we mean by be elastic is that you want to think of topics that tie to a lot of different parts of you. So it could be, that you are involved in Mexican folk dance or something like that. And then, like when you're talking about that, it's a really broad topic because it relates to your heritage, it relates to your creativity, it relates to your family, it relates to, whatever it relates to for you. And you can do that. So it's just really nice to have a topic that has a lot of different elements to it. You also want to show variety, meaning that even if you spend 95% of your time on the soccer field, you would only write one essay about soccer. You will just choose that one topic and have these be 4 different topics. So you definitely don't want to do that.
Right.
Tell a complete story. Sorry, Laura, do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Tell a complete story. What we mean by that is don't leave anything on the table. Like, don't leave the obvious things out. Like, we were just meeting with a student and Laura's like, we were going through all the topics that he was going to write. And she's just like, this business you've been running for 4 years is not in any of these, you know, so you don't want to, you know, and I'm glad she caught it because I was like, this looks great. So she had 4 other great ones, but she was absolutely right. Like, don't leave something big out. I was working with a student once who played travel softball for 10 years and just wasn't going to write about it. Certainly you want to write about things that have been a major part of your life. And then you want things that help you stand out. And that is really about making connections that are a little bit unusual. So if you're writing about a sport or you're writing about, you know, being in student government or anything like that, that you're really making it distinct enough that it's really about you. Because you just have to remember that even though you've had this incredible experience, even if you're the president of your student body, there is a president of a student body at every high school in America. So it's kind of like to make it specific to you and what that experience was like for you is really, really important.
And that's where the examples come in, right?
Right.
Because being a president at your school doesn't look the same as being a president of another school with other issues and concerns. So you get to talk about how well you know your community by making it super personal. Because everybody does get the same things, you know, they get management skills, but you want to talk about exactly how you did that at your school.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to run through each of these briefly so you can see the full questions. The bullet points that are below these questions, this is all provided by the UCs. So this is not, you know, so it's not Liz and Laura's version of what the UCs might be looking for. This is what the UCs are asking you directly. So, you know, this is in their brainstorming. They have it on their website. They have a brainstorming section. So you just think about this. Describe an example of your leadership experience in which you have positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, or contributed to group efforts over time.
Right. And this is one of those things where, you know, be clear if you hold a role with an impressive title, you know, definitely. Or if you started something, and if you started something in response to a need, but there are lots of different ways to be a leader, you know, without a title. And you definitely want to think about all those kind of experiences that you have. Sometimes you weren't captain of the team, but you were sort of an unofficial captain who really took other younger players under your wing. So there are different ways to interpret this. And just think
leadership
about
definitely happens in jobs. Like that's responsibility. Leadership, it comes with responsibility. Leadership happens at home. If you have family responsibilities, the UCs are very open to you using that as something explaining, especially if you have family responsibilities that have kept you from having kind of a more typical extracurricular activities list. You should absolutely, I didn't say that when we were talking about activities, but you should absolutely include any sort of, if you're babysitting younger siblings, if you're taking care of, you know, if you're cooking dinner for the family or whatever it is that you're doing for the family, that they care about that a lot.
Right. So, and the way, just to kind of piggyback on that, is it comes down to time for when you're back looking at your activities and saying, should I put this on here or not? If you spend time doing it, not video games. Sorry. No, don't put that down. But I mean, if you spend time and you have a responsibility, put it down. Definitely, a lot of the things that people do in their homes takes a lot of time, and they're, you know, the UCs, like most colleges, are looking for people who are organized and who are go-getters and make things happen.
Yeah.
So, okay.
For creativity, every person has a creative side, and it can be expressed in many ways: problem solving, original and innovative thinking, and artistically, to name a few. Describe how you express your creative side.
Right.
So go ahead, Laura.
Oh, I really like this because, again, this whole idea about being elastic, right? So the common ways of going at it are when you think about artistic pursuits, right? When you think about theater and art and dance, but there's creativity in all fields. So anytime you're coming up with an idea, a thought, a concept that didn't exist before, you're being creative. your job is to explain like what you do, why you do it. Is it something that you perform? Like we just had a student who was looking into writing his creativity essay about coming up for new ideas in debate and thinking on his feet. And that's not necessarily something, we go to right away when we think creativity, but I think that, that could be a very, very good answer. Anytime that you come up with a workaround or a unique approach.
Yeah,
And
we had someone last year,
go ahead.
the redesigning the Girl Scout curriculum. So she focused on kind of the work she did there to think more creatively about what Girl Scouts should be doing with their time. So
Exactly.
It was interesting.
And there's one more thing I just want to say as a general note, which is read all parts of the question. Really read every part of the question, because you'll see that some of these are multi-layered.
So, for example,
Just
segue, Laura. What would you say is your greatest talent or skill, and how have you developed and demonstrated that talent over time? So this one is often really hard. Students will decline to write something down in this one. And really, in the end, most people, I would think, answer this one. Most of our students answer this one.
right.
It's hard because it's not saying, what are you the greatest at in the whole world? They're not asking you that. They're asking you what your greatest talent or skill is. And so it's a really hard, it sounds like a braggy question. I think it's hard for students to answer. But when you think about it, it's a really great place to capture things that you've spent a lot of time getting better at. Like we had a girl last year who I just loved her approach. She's a senior JV tennis player, meaning that she's not the best even in her school. Like she's still on JV as a senior.
Right.
But she developed this talent over time, and she was able to talk about kind of her progress and the roles that she had. You can always use these too. She got to talk about leadership a little bit in there and those sorts of things. So I think this often becomes a really easy place to talk about a sport, to talk about, because there's not really a place to talk about a sport otherwise. So it's
Right.
kind of where, and what have you done over time to develop your skill? So it's an interesting, we have someone today talking about this in terms of business, because the UC, even though the UCs are not a great place to study business, just FYI, but just kind of talking about, this is a skill that he's been working on for years. And so, yeah. So
it can
just
also
kind of
be, oh, sorry, Liz.
No, you go ahead.
There was a lag. It can also be a soft skill or a soft talent. So it could be that one of your talents is that we had a student who said his talent was that he was never worried about looking stupid. And so he tried so many things. And he was able to, talk about that very soft skill, but actually ended up talking about 3 or 4 different activities as a result of things that he had discovered. So it was, it was just a really different approach and very interesting. And he did get into UCSB.
He did.
From out of state.
He also got into, a major part of that essay was his great skills at public speaking, though, too, because he wasn't afraid of looking stupid. So he became a public speaker. So he tied it to something tangible. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Sure.
So you mentioned it earlier that you're going to choose 4 of these.
Right.
And you also want to tell your complete story. So are you trying to connect the 4 things with a theme?
No.
Okay. They're completely separate.
Right.
Totally separate.
What we mean by your complete story is more the different pieces of yourself. You might be an athlete, you might be a leader, you might be community service. What are those sorts of pieces of you that you want the UCs to know about? Yeah, no
and if you
theme.
can work into any one of those things, if you can work into just one of the 4, not to all of them, they're going to be read all together. But what you want to study at the UCs and why, like if any of these things relate to that, I think that's a really good thing to get into one of them.
Right.
Describe how you've taken advantage of a significant educational opportunity or worked to overcome an educational barrier you have faced. So this would be, the AVID program is an opportunity, but a lot of kids write about doing dual enrollment. I don't know if that's what you guys call it on that coast.
We don't really. I mean, people can take classes at different schools, but I guess everybody has a different name for it. But when you've actually gone beyond, like at some places, you can take half your day at some schools, you can take half your day at a community college. I mean, but these are things that you've, maybe done in the summer, really deep, and especially if it's something that you've had to apply for and be accepted into, you would definitely mention that here, that you got to, do X, Y, or Z program. And then working to overcome an educational barrier you have faced, that could, it definitely helps you talk about personal characteristics here. You also want to remember that you have an additional information section on the UCs as you do on the Common App. So if you're thinking about things like, having, say, ADHD, you might want to just save that for the additional information and use this educational opportunity one or another PIQ to tell your story, because you do get room to talk about anything that's affected your life, your academics, in the additional information section.
They actually have two additional information sections. You have one that follows directly after your academic transcript, where you can explain anything that looks a little weird on your transcript or in your grades. And then you have another one in this section where you can just do additional information. So that's a really good point, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so number 5, do you want to read that one?
Sure. Describe the most significant challenge you have faced and the steps you've taken to overcome this challenge. How has this challenge affected your academic achievement? Where you want to be really clear is that second piece. If the challenge has not affected your academic achievement, this is probably not the question that you want to answer. It's different than the Common Apps prompt about challenges. But you want to think about, how has my life changed because of this? But you really do want to at least have something that affected your school life.
And I think what's interesting about this question is, or to keep in mind, is that back to the idea that this is personal insight questions, the word insight, you need to be sufficiently through something to be able to reflect on its meaning. So if you're currently in the middle of a situation, first of all, I'm sorry. Second of all, I would say, I heard it said today for the first time in a way that I really liked, which was you write from scars, not wounds. So if you have an open wound right now, you don't write about that. You only write when it's scarred over and you have some perspective on it. So,
I love that, Liz.
I just read that today. Thanks.
I didn't make
it up,
but I think that's great. Yeah.
So I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And again, and to that point, it's only like if you think about an essay like this in thirds, you would just think only a third of it is what happened. The rest of it, the second third is what did I do? And the third is what did I learn? Why does it matter? And so you are going to be thinking about that. And when we're talking about 350 words, we're talking about only 100 words dedicated to the big event that happened. And in truth, the way to write that is to write it as long as you need to write it, because you might need to write it much longer than that and then come back and cut that down to kind of find the meaning in it. But anyway, that's... We were going to remember how fast we were going to go through these.
Remember how fast we were going to go? I was just going to say, I just looked. It's 8:21.
Okay. So we have 3 more. Let's go.
We have 3 more PIQs, and then we will answer your questions at top speed. But an academic subject that inspires you. Describe how you further this interest inside or outside of the classroom. So yeah, a good way, I mean, I really like this, is to think about like which class would you go to even if you didn't have to. And remember, it's about that subject that you took and you ran with it. Okay, so you can definitely think about like, you really loved English, for example, and then maybe outside of school you started reading British novels on your own, and then maybe you started submitting poetry to a journal. This is kind of the you ran with it academic subject. I personally always think if you can possibly answer this question, you should, because you are going to college for academics first. And, if you can really tie it into you being this self starter, this learner who takes things beyond the classroom, then I think it puts you in good light for the application.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
So history, we've had people who did history that were then working on the election. We had and seeing democracy in action. We've had a lot of biology and CS and that sort of stuff. But I think the second part of this question is what's really important, because it does show that curiosity.
Hmm.
So 7 is, what have you done to make your school or community a better place? And what's interesting about this one is that you get to define your community. So it can be your school, it can be uh, your family, it can be kind of your, however, your community,
Yeah, it could be your hometown, it can be your town, it can be your street. Um,
right.
it's really just kind of how you define it. It can be your family.
But they're always looking for impact, right? So what kind of impact have you had on the world around you? And do you care about that? Is that something that is important to you?
And
Um,
just to, again,
Go
to
ahead.
really fast, because it's 8:24, whenever you can write about results that you could measure, if you raised a certain amount of money or you increased membership, that will, you would want to put that in your activities, and then you can highlight some of it in your essay, in your personal insight questions, not essays. Okay.
The last one is, what is already beyond what has already been shared in your application. What do you believe makes you a standout as a strong candidate for admissions to the University of California? So this is your chance to tell them what makes you an excellent choice for them. But you have to really be aware. And the part that makes this hard is, like we said before, these 9 campuses are pretty different. So what is it that they share? Because you're writing one. You can't write different applications to different schools. So don't ever put a name of a school in these applications if you're applying to more than one. Um, and and then just think about what the University of California is in general, which is this large research university system. Um, and why
Yeah.
is that going to be beneficial to you? Why is it going to be beneficial to you, or how are you going to make it beneficial to them to have you there on campus?
Hmm.
So the things to avoid, and this is directly from UCSB, and I literally copied it over here, which is why it's in different colors than my thing. And I did that just to remember to say that the number one thing you should never do is copy anything from anybody else. But I did that here. But definitely no acronyms. They're not going to look it up. So if it's like here it's the CSS Championships, which is the California Central Coast, that sort of stuff. You got to spell everything out. A lot of people like to try and start with a quote at the top of their essay or something like that. They don't want that. They don't want the philosophy, the creative writings. This is all of that sort of stuff they just don't want. Don't restate the prompts. Just really get in as if someone asked you this in an interview. Actually, if I'm reading all of these are basically the same. They're basically all saying, get to the point as quickly as possible.
Get to the point. And also no putting in links to websites.
Okay.
Even if it's your own website, they're not going to go there and
Don't
check
click
it.
Yeah. So this is our contact information, and we're happy to answer any questions you guys have now.
Yes, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A or in the chat. and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you.
And
So thank
Dan, will
guys
you read those out?
Yes, but I haven't seen any questions yet. So if anybody
Okay, that's what I was just looking at.
Yeah. So
We wish you all luck on this process.
Yeah, please.
One of the things I wanted to say before we finish up here is, as you looked at these prompts, a lot of it sounds to me like, and even that last slide you showed, you can sort of kind of dump the information onto the page or the, digital page, and then you have to go back and do a lot of work to really answer the question in the appropriate way. So there's a tremendous amount of sort of editing and redoing and making it concise and all that stuff. There's a lot that goes into it.
Absolutely. And it's harder to write short than write long. I mean,
Right.
as a writer, I know that it's really hard to be concise. The other thing that I would say is sometimes you will start writing to one prompt and realize, oh, this might fit better in another one. For
I think that
example,
happens a lot with the creativity prompt, because I think you
yes,
can try and squeeze things into the creativity prompt that aren't kind of naturally creative, like we were talking about, like using debate or using the Girl Scout thing. But you have to keep the focus on the answer, on the question, which is about creativity. So sometimes that gets hard to do, and it's better to move it. But if you can keep it focused, then it's a good way to do it.
yeah. And
I have
that's
one other
why. Go ahead.
question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you talked about this and maybe I missed it, but is there sort of a percentage of weight that's put onto the different elements in the application?
Well, there were
I
those.
think
Go ahead.
I think it differs by different schools, and you can actually Google and see how a freshman application is reviewed by and there's a website, there's a link on the main UC page that links to all the schools. So there's different schools are valuing different things differently, but I don't think that so those 13 points of comprehensive review is kind of what they're looking at in total. And some of those are specific just to California students, but in general, different schools are valuing kind of different things. They have slightly different focus, but they tend to be pretty, they are doing a holistic review. So they're reading all parts of the application and considering it's not just, there was a question we had earlier about the CSU versus the UC application. So the CSU system, that's the California state system, which is 23 schools. And that includes kind of, again, there's no flagship, but the big names that people know are Cal State, Cal Poly, whatever, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying,
San
it's
Diego
California
State.
State Polytechnic Institute at San Luis Obispo. We call it Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. We actually call it Cal Poly SLO. But that is kind of probably the most competitive to get into. San Diego State, Long Beach, San Jose State. Yeah. So those are some of the more competitive ones to get into. Their application is entirely different. It should take you about a half an hour to fill it out, maybe an hour, but it's just factual information. It's just, there's no activities list, there's no essays, there's no anything except for your GPA. And it used to be that they would take your GPA and your test scores and combine that together to make what they call an eligibility index. But now they don't even have test scores. So they are really basing this on a very little bit of information. They do ask you, some of the schools, if you have had, for your average number of hours you spend on extracurricular activities, and there's a checkbox to say whether or not you had leadership experience in those activities, but there is no place to write any words about any of that. So it's very, very straightforward. Unless you're applying in something like nursing, in which case sometimes there's an extra essay, but mostly there's not.
Any other questions?
Well, I hope this has been helpful for everyone, and for those who have attended, And those who weren't able to attend, I'll be sending out an email. You'll have access to the recording, and I can also give you access to the slides. Is that okay? For folks to
Yeah,
have
that's
access?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for letting us talk about this.
Yeah, thank you so much for your insights to these
Sure.
insight questions. And I mean, I certainly learned a lot.
Good.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, everybody.
Sure.
Thank you so
Thank
much. Take
you.
care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.